everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of Beyond the Alert. Today I'm speaking with Steve Fridakis, CISO in residence at Cyderes. Steve, thanks for chatting with me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me here.
All right, so let's dive right in. You have a lot of fantastic insights. So you've built cybersecurity programs across 5 continents and multiple industries. What's one universal truth about security that holds up no matter where you are in the world?
I think humans will always find a way, a creative way, to bypass your cleverest security controls. I've seen sophisticated medical systems, New York studios, and despite technology policies, even AI now, there is always going to be some way that you have not addressed, or by mistake it was allowed to be accessible. Obviously, security is human before it's technical. And I do recall that despite everything that we had done, a certain organization I was working at, they were able to find our discarded visitor badges that were still accessible in the garbage cans around, Bryant Park in New York, and use them. And they were always going to find the rogue Wi-Fi connection and so on. So that's the truth, that we have to be vigilant because there's always going to be a way.
And it seems like sometimes it's the simple things like the security guards, for example, that people don't think about, right?
That's right.
Interesting. So what is the biggest misconception that organizations have about vulnerability management, and how does that break into the real world?
I believe that the biggest misconception about vulnerabilities is that it is a list problem. You scan, you get a report, you patch what you can afford, which typically the ultras and the highs. But in reality, it's a context problem. So the reports are valid, but they do hide the fact that organizations do not have an accurate asset inventory, and they cannot fix everything anyway. So what we try to break the assumption here is to bring some context and to just say, is this particular vulnerability, independent of how it's been classified by the scanner, applicable to me? Can it be exploited? Can it be breached? And if so, will that expose sensitive information? So we start putting context and awareness of how does that apply to me. I do recall even in very recent organizations that we still had Log4j. But if you started looking at it, it was in a system that it was not accessible. It was in a system that had no actual data that we cared for. So we shifted our resources to things that truly matter, and to place into that context and conversation the perspective of what exactly is housed in the systems that are shown to be susceptible to a certain vulnerability. So this is what we're trying to think about these days, and that's the key misconception when it comes to vulnerabilities.
Yeah, it's well said, because you really have to consider the organization, its main revenue drivers, right, as well as the ecosystem, and then understand how the vulnerabilities fit into that.
That's right.
So you've said in the past that compliance is not security. Can you share a story where an organization passed every audit but was still fundamentally vulnerable?
First of all, before I say about the organization, I want to talk a little bit about why I believe that that's the case. So I believe that most of the audience that are security practitioners, they will recognize that a lot of frameworks leave key components of our work out, like development, the whole DevOps business. That's not in a framework that is quite prominent. Other things about like business continuity, business processes, all of that are not in frameworks that we typically use. So therefore, equating the whole notion of we're compliant, therefore we're secure is a big fallacy. So I've seen systems that were audited, all the boxes were ticked, but then they were hacked. Now, why is that? Because if we consider the average audit and the controls that go with it, we will very quickly recognize that to attain an audit, first of all, we rely on a sample of controls, and the evidence is also a very, very small percentage of the overall. So therefore, what we do is we validate audit by sampling. And if you are lucky and the sampling is representative of your key issues, then you got lucky. But it's unlikely that what you have will actually reflect reality. So you ask for a specific example. So without saying which organization, obviously, it was a system that it was under PCI and handling web application access to media. And that was obviously on a PCI basis, it was pristine, passed, no observations, fantastic, big plaque on the wall. But the issue was, and what we found really quick was that there was a problem with the interfaces to the system, which was not in the scope. And that led into certain issues. So compliance gives us all the illusion of control, and attackers gave us the reality check. So what we tell to executives is that while compliance keeps regulators happy, security keeps your name out of the headlines. And that's why we start thinking that the two, if you do it right, and if you implement the right controls, you can use audit to actually validate some of those controls. But what that predisposes is the ability of continuous monitoring. Get away from audit being point of time with an interval of, say, if you're lucky, twice a year. Most of them are once a year. And make it in such a way that you unify your controls across multiple frameworks and you validate them as often as possible. That will give you get close to, but I would never subscribe to any notion that compliance equates to security.
That's really interesting and definitely a critical distinction. So, in that vein, what is the most dangerous false sense of security that you see organizations fall into today?
Oh, I have seen many times, even in casual conversations with colleagues, we say, "Oh, I got a new tool," and it is, I think, it's the equivalent of "I got a new car" or whatever your toy is. So the misconception is that we add the tool, therefore we become more secure. So as I was preparing for this conversation, I said to myself, well, how many tools do I actually have in my current situation? And I was going to bet with myself that I was in the 20s and 30s. Well, I came with 80. I have many tools. So the average, again, look, the whole security stack. So each one of them has a dashboard. Each one of them provides information, and sometimes the information is complementary. Sometimes, most of the times, it could actually be contradictory. So another tool does not add to your security. Now, I have said many a time in the past that we have misunderstood defense in depth and its benefits. And this is why we misunderstood it. We said defense in depth never suggested that we're going to take 20 tools, stack them one on top of another, and hope that one of them will actually remain standing when we're being attacked. That was not the case. The true defense in depth is about layered security: people, processes, technology, and then saying that if these three rather work well synergetically, we will have a strong security stack that cannot be breached easily. So more layers does not actually mean more security. In reality, too many disconnected tools create havoc: blind spots, slowdown detection, a SOC team that is beyond exhaustion. So the defense in disarray is what we find ourselves with the introduction of new tools, new features. So we have to sit back and validate what tools truly are more providing information rather that we can consume, and providing information that is flowing through our SIEM and our detection and our automation in a better way, and economize in the deployment and the burden that goes with it, and frankly, the expense, and find a stack that really makes sense for us.
Yeah, because there's also often a lot of duplication between the various technologies, right? And to your point, the contradicting information, which then is okay, what is your single source of truth? Where how far does that visibility go across your security stack? And is it causing more cycles in your team, specifically the SOC, to figure out what is really going on, right? With conflicting signals. Interesting. So, what separates a high performing SOC team from one that's just going through the motions essentially and getting burned out?
I recall somebody told me once, and I actually didn't tell me. I saw it in the back of their office. I said, "What do I pretend I don't know?" And I'm going to paraphrase that a little bit to answer your question. So I want a SOC to tell me what I do not know. Obviously, we see these days being they know the controls and they're very deterministic. So we pump a lot of information in our SIEMs. Then we say, okay, tell me did that happen? Or correlate this to that and find a connection. So that is all predictable. And there is value to that. So I'm not taking that away. However, malware signatures, policy violations, these are things we've already imagined. These are things that we collect information, and we're so thankful to our colleagues that work the SOC that they alert us when some of that happens. Now, attackers, though, and the hackers don't have access to our playbooks. They find ways. They're innovative people. So a great SOC is the one that will be able to look at signals, to find something that is out of the ordinary, to have the persistence to explore it and determine whether it is something that is truly going on. When I was working in a media company and we had a hack that made the news and it was something that consumed our lives for a good 3 months, we recognized that this is not an event that just sort of happened yesterday. It was an event that was going on in a very, very slow way over a long period of time. So I need a SOC that can connect the dots. Privileged account logging from a strange IP in a strange hour, subtle exfiltration traffic going on for a long time. So we need to escape the determinism of this. The SIM didn't say red, so it must be green, and get to the point where we say, if something appears to be wrong, okay, well, could very well be a false positive, but we need the SOC to be inquisitive and to be able to try and determine whether that is something that's a potential violation to a control or something that was going wrong.
Yeah, so basically being proactive and just as creative as the attackers, right, in terms of their day-to-day and looking at things from a different angle,
Yes,
which is tricky to do when they're so overwhelmed with alerts to begin with, right?
yes, indeed. They're all overworked, and that's why we need to say, let's not turn on another 20, 30 controls. Let's try to find a way to make better investigators out of them, given obviously sufficient telemetry, but get away from the, okay, you get another one to investigate, and then after a while, they just become fatigued.
Yeah. So this brings us to an interesting point. What do you think about AI in respect to the SOC, and does it deliver value in your mind in its current state today versus it being mostly hype? I mean, we have what, 40 plus vendors out there all saying the same thing?
So I had a conversation the other day by someone who was lamenting how much money they pay to one of the popular sims, and I was saying, is this the end of the sim, the AI? And I don't think so. It is certainly the end of the sim as the sun in our security solar system. So sims for a very long time have been glorified log collectors with all the rules bolted in. Okay, so AI is actually now helping us go beyond the known bats. And that ties us to the conversation we just had. Now, what is the value of AI is it augments our analysis by surfacing weak signals, by spotting anomalies at scale, and potentially even predicting what the attackers will do next. So it shifts us from plain alert bingo with the SOC, which we said, into understanding whether the exposure is true, exploitable, and even potentially plain simulation to see to what degree the tools that attackers would use would be successful, or something in our stack will actually stop it downstream. Here is the problem, though. The blind use of AI is dangerous. The same way blind trust in our SIM is dangerous. So any model makes assumptions. And one word we love, at least I love in AI, is explainability. So I need to understand the biases. I need to understand how this thing works. And I need to understand the assumptions that it makes so that when something is surfacing, I need to be able to see this is truly what happens, or this is something that will actually require some attention. And then potentially even automation, which is one of the benefits that we have here. So the benefit of the AI and how it augments the capability is to take action. And what we see is that we go now beyond the console of the red and the green lights and something to this is something that I can validate quickly and I can actually determine whether it will pose a true potential violation to my system with my assumptions. So going back to tell me what I don't know, and it can be realized easily beyond the capabilities of a human. So that's the benefit of AI, in my opinion, these days.
Yeah, which is tricky to do when a lot of the vendors don't have much information out there as far as the product goes, right? You see the copy on the website. And then the biggest question that even we get here at Dropzone is, okay, how exactly is it doing what is happening in the workflow? What is it capable of versus not, right? And being really transparent about what it can do today.
Indeed, but there can be a way to actually do that. So hopefully we will explore it because you cannot just ask the model a question and hope that you're going to get an answer back because essentially that's linguistics. But the idea is, can that be explained technically? And can you build a model using the foundation of AI to actually explore your particular situation? But you have to know it. That's the thing.
Yeah, and then also the ability, like any AI, regardless of what you're using agents for, to feed it context based on your organization and adjust. And so if a SOC team were to use AI, how would you see the role of humans changing when AI can detect threats faster, but you need to be able to trust it and know exactly how it's working, right?
So I like to say that AI is not compassionate. Humans are. So what does that mean? Okay, so let's see in a medical setting. I've been working in healthcare for quite a few years now, and I'm saying AI can tell us based on our log files something is weird. The human can say this could derail a medical system's ability to meet its surgery schedule tomorrow. So the human will bring judgment, context, and creativity. Now, let's press on a little bit on that because I do believe that there are certain things that humans can do that AI, yeah, cannot. So there is a risk trade off. So when AI tells you there is a problem in your database, then you need to say, what does that mean? Does that mean that tomorrow I won't be able to get new patients in? That means that people cannot get access to a certain facility. So this is not an algorithm decision. This is business judgment. So that's one thing. The second thing is what I like to refer to as the interpretation of intent. So let's say AI sees data moving in my network. Now, a human can say, is this a system update that's going on? Is this a new acquisitions going on? Or this is an attack? So the interpretation of patterns implies that you know of actions that happen beyond what you collect in logs for. So the other thing is attackers are actually humans. As I said before, in my experience with the attack in this media system I was working, I actually had conversations with the attacker. Now, we're not pretty, but because it was ransomware, there was a conversation and there was this tick for tat kind of going on. So attackers think creatively, same as us, but AI can spot patterns, but it doesn't scheme. It does not like create scenarios that, at least not the. I'm aware of defense level AI, but not the kind of AI that we use day to day in our work. Now, the other very important thing is that when a breach happens, the executives, the board, they do not want to hear from AI. They want to hear from you and they want to truly understand what's going on. It's your job to calm them down. It's your job to put things in perspective and the language that you use based on the culture of your organization. AI cannot do that. And then, obviously, there is ethics. So the ethics and AI, you need to. It's easy for AI to say kill the kill switch, to bring it down, but it is very difficult to do that without the human coming into play and say, what's the collateral damage, what's the reputational damage, and who truly gets hurt, and then bring all that in a perspective of your operation. So, going back to your question, I'm sorry for the long answer. The bottom line, I guess AI is our microscope, but we are the scientists, and we will be able to say we're accountable. We need to oversee our operation, and we need to interpret what we see. And there is absolutely a very good synergy between us and the AI. And I'm not sure there is even a discussion of one replacing the other. It is a synergetic situation right now that I see and I live every day.
Yeah, we firmly believe that it's AI working together with humans, not one or the other. We get at the SOC manager level, not as much, but I would say the SOC analyst level, we get questions of, especially in markets that are still emerging, like Canada, is this going to replace me, right? And I absolutely understand at a high level why that someone would say that, but in reality, for all the reasons you've talked us through, there is no replacing humans.
That's right.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you giving that much context and providing the long answer because a lot of times people skip over those key components, right? Of okay, what happens in a breach? I mean, context. I've heard from so many CISOs of depending on how your team handles those conversations during a breach, they either advance their career or they're pretty much out, right? I mean, the nuances of working with the executive team, resolving a breach, and all of those pieces, especially to your point in healthcare, are really key. And as far as we know today, AI and for quite some time won't have that EQ or any of those abilities to understand the nuances.
Maybe someday, yeah.
All right. So, given you've worked across healthcare, defense, finance, and tech, and more, I'm sure, how does the security strategy need to change based on the industry?
When I went to work for a media company, which was an incredible experience, I started realizing that what I knew as a CISO, that I was coming out of the UN, was quite different. It introduced a time component. And then I started changing my thinking. There is always a time component. You see, when you have a script and you're developing a program, any program, could be Game of Thrones, it can be anything. The script before publication is actually very, very valuable. The moment the program makes it, then anyone can have the script. You will find it online. So I started thinking that the definition of critical is very different across industries. An hour prior to publishing a financial report is absolutely essential. That after it publishes, anyone can have it for free. In healthcare, things are quite different. The timing is actually spans a very, very long time. And I started thinking in various industries how that plays, because the control was not something binary. We have controls, but then there is this time component that talks about how do we manage our data and how over time the accessibility and the controls that go with it actually shift. When I was at the UN, I think it was a down moment. Someone told me, Steve, the UN operations are the sun, the IT and the CISO are the moon. And I sat back and I said, did this guy just insult me? But what he actually meant was quite profound. The moon does not shine by itself, it reflects the sun. So security is never the star of the show. We sit back, we reflect, we protect the mission. It was quite humbling because as long as I was there to protect peacekeeping and all the important stuff that we were doing, then similarly, the surgery schedule, the access to the EHR records, that's the premiere of the next season of a show. My role was never to be the center. It was to ensure that the true center, the warfighter, the peacekeeper, all the things that I worked for, the mission, they could do whatever they could do without disruption. So the principle as you shift from one industry to another is actually the same. What really matters to me is to know what the mission is and to know how you support that mission and recognize that while the controls are transferable from one industry to another, identity access, all of that stuff, the time component changes, and the ability to actually know which industry is more sensitive to access, or which industry is a little bit more open, or which industry has a broader time component than others, which are more time of the year or whatever. These are the things that vary. So that's what I've learned moving from one to another.
Interesting. And how long does it take you to figure out what those timelines look like once you jump into a new industry?
It takes the ability to actually learn from the people that run the mission and to approach them and say, I'm here to help you out. And how does this work? It is not difficult. What actually, though, is difficult is to understand how these things will go under duress. When you're dealing with an incident, on where you're dealing with a situation where you have to work outside the box, a satellite, a VSAT satellite on top of a Range Rover. That's not something that you've done a lot, and you just have to improvise. So that's these are the kind of things that you learn and you cherish years after. But this is something that a new CISO needs to engage and understand and deploy quickly.
And so for new CISOs, not just for industry specific, right, but a first time CISO, I mean, they obviously don't come with those learnings. Do they refer to their peers a lot? How would a first time CISO get up to speed quickly enough, right?
So recognize that the CISO is not just a technical job. Obviously, we do have all of us the ability to bring our technology understanding and what we've done. I used to write code long time ago, so that always comes with you and the understanding of how things work. But the one thing I would say to a new CISO is understand your controls, understand how the system works, understand what happens at any given time and what could be happening that you have not seen. So you have to be inquisitive. You have to understand that the world does not rotate over you, but you're there on a supporting function. But there's going to be a time where you're going to have to actually take the controls, and you need to be able to be a calming function within the organization. And you need to be able to operate. I was very, very lucky when I was with HBO that the CEO and my immediate manager let me do my job, and they were there to support what we were doing, and they were there to help us and the legal folks that we were working along side by side to deal with that. That doesn't always happen, but as I said, the new CISO needs to understand what the mission is, understand what the controls are in place, being able to evaluate in a business context the improvements that need to be made, and do their job given what they have, but not being afraid to take the necessary action, always aware of what matters, the impact to the mission. And the impact to the humans in a healthcare setting, to the warfighter in a defense setting, and so on. That's what they need to do. I didn't say anything about technical or yet another tool. I said more about understanding the business context. That's really the story about the effectiveness of a security person.
Yeah, because you need to understand the business function for first and foremost, right? And then how security layers into that. And you need to be able to manage and command the room in an emergency as well and get the buy-in.
That's right.
Yeah, which is often, I think, so forgotten when cybersecurity vendors look at CISOs, right? It's all about the tech, but all the other pieces kind of they lose focus of that you all have to worry about.
That's right. The human factor is absolutely important, especially when you are running an incident and that goes for a very long time. That is truly important.
Like a pressure test, I suppose, right?
Yes, it is.
So, how do you help executive teams understand cyber risk without the technical jargon, essentially? I mean, you touched on some of those points, but I'm sure you'd love to dive into that a little bit more.
I would say if you show up and you say, we detected anomalous lateral movement through east-west traffic to the hybrid cloud perimeter, is not going to go down very well. So here's what I like to do. Going back to your original question about vulnerabilities and how do we explain that? So we're going to use the same sort of paradigm and we say, what happened in human language, events? What happened? So what is the business impact? So, what it means in dollars, in downtime, in reputation, or regulation. Then you got to talk about your assets. What's at stake? Customer, data, operations. And finally, you need to talk about the risk, which is the likelihood and the consequences of what's going on. So this is the kind of language. So at the end of the day, cyber risk is business risk. So I'm not trying to sound smart. I'm trying to sound effective and just to make sure that the business understands that the situation, the instant, what's at stake, and how security will enable them to recover. So this is the kind of language and the kind of engagement that I would employ.
Can you walk us through a moment in your career where a security decision you made had a major business impact or consequence?
So going back to my work at the media, we recognized that there was a potential issue. The issue at the time, because as I said, it took months, was not confirmed. But we were looking at a potentially high risk scenario of a potential ransomware, and there was something that it was at the very beginning of a major production. So the ecosystem is not actually in media even known because of there's so many subcontractors and it is like a almost an amoeba. It's just growing by the day. So the decision that we had to make was, do we stop potentially disrupting production schedules, potentially having a risk of irreversible damage? So we took the decision to overnight force multi-factor authentication and roll it and rotate all our passwords in all our ecosystem. Now, this may sound trivial, but if you see you doing this overnight and you recognize that editors, contractors, automated pipelines could be locked out, the potential to disruption is quite. What actually made that particular incident even more complicated is that we could not use our email because that was one of the compromised systems. So we found a way to communicate the change utilizing other means. Yeah, production teams were frustrated. Our help desk people were very unhappy because their tickets surged. Some of our operations had to pause, but what matters, going back to the business context and the conversation, is that we did not miss 1 millisecond of production. And that's what truly mattered. And we were able to neutralize the ransomware situation and we could recover in a matter of days. So a few stressful days help you neutralize a potential issue that actually played out to be a true issue and to be able to recover a live production environment which remained intact. So these are the kind of decision. So the takeaway out of this whole ordeal is that threat hunting is not just about finding anomalies. It's about taking the necessary decision, as I was saying before, when you asked me about the new CISO. Act decisively when you detect a potential adversary. And obviously, tying that to AI, yes, we had good alerts, but we were able to, humans, we were able to make the necessary judgment call and just protect the business in real time.
Must be interesting as well when you don't have the channels like email to relay why you're making that decision and people get frustrated with you across departments, right? Until after the fact when you could say, well, or maybe you can't even share anything about that other than what we needed to do was done. It worked. Everyone's fine. Thank you, right?
Yes, indeed.
Interesting. So the last thing we do on this podcast is save a question from the previous guest and ask the current guest. So the one for you is if you could give one piece of advice to a SOC analyst or security leader who's drowning in alerts, feeling burned out, what would that be?
If I took away half your tools tomorrow, what would your team still be able to do well? So the answer to that will reveal how tool dependent the SOC operation is or how strategy driven they are. That's what I would ask.
Good one. All right. We'll have to let you know what the next person answers.
I'll be watching. I'll be watching.
So, what is the one question you'd like to ask the next guest on this podcast?
I would like to ask the next guest about what is the data suggesting beyond the controls? What could be happening that you haven't seen yet? Because that will prompt them to see whether the controls actually cover their whole operation. That is something that I always sit back and unfortunately leads into a proliferation of controls because I'm saying what I'm inheriting, which could come to the hundreds of various controls. actually they're not as effective. So that's what I'd like to ask them.
So I've learned a few things. One, make good analogies in business so it's easy for business folks to understand what's happening on the technical side. And the other one is I have to be careful if I interview with you for anything because you ask good open-ended questions to tell you about the person's strategy or lack thereof, as well as how they think and how secure things are. So this has been absolute pleasure speaking with you, Steve. Is there anything that you would like to leave people with before we end?
Security is not a technical endeavor. It is a combination of business and technology, and a lot of compassion to those that matter, and those that matter are the mission. So thank you, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share my experiences and life with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the compassion piece is what most folks forget about security teams. I think they're just there to provide complexity. So couldn't stress that more, and I'm glad you brought it up. How can people connect with you if they'd like to stay in touch or learn more?
My email, first name dot last name at Cyderes.com. Please reach out. I'd love to hear back your opinions and about what we said here or anything else that comes to mind.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Steve, and have a great day.
Thank you.